All right, let's get started. So this lecture is about Meiji Restoration. As we mentioned before, there are basically two historical transformations for the Japanese civilization. The first one happened in the 7th century when Japan was defeated by Tang Dynasty in China. Uh, so so after that, the Japanese started to learn Chinese culture, learn from Chinese civilization, right? They sent many students to study in China, and the Japanese students in China brought back all these Chinese political system, laws, literature, Buddhism, lots of other aspects of culture, and that totally transformed the Japanese society. Ended in the Taika reform, which aimed to transform Japan into another China, right? They're trying to build a Chinese style central empire in Japan. It had some effects, but eventually failed. Now we're moving on to the second major transformation in Japanese society, that is Meiji Restoration. Okay, Meiji Restoration. Under the Tokugawa rule, we talked about the Tokugawa rule last time. Society is changing. Okay, even without direct foreign aggression, Japanese society is still changing. Okay, in Tokugawa period, um, by and large, people enjoy the peace and order and prosperity. Population is growing, right? Markets are growing. We talk about all these market towns near Osaka, right? Urban culture is growing, right? Art is growing. So Japanese history is developing. It's not unchanging. It's not a monolithic before the Europeans came. But of course, in 1853, when Westerners finally arrived in Japan, they brought huge change. They brought huge change. One thing I want to mention before the Americans arrived at Japan, uh, the British already went to China. This happened in the early parts of 19th century. Okay, we know that thanks to globalization, it was the Portuguese, Spaniards, Spanish, the Dutch that came to East Asia for trade. Uh, the British and Americans, they are latecomers. Okay, they arrived in East Asia much later. But once the British arrived in East Asia in early 19th century, they appeared to be a strong power that tried to open up the Chinese market because China is so big, right? So the British they try to sell things to China, but of course Europeans always want goods and products from East Asia, especially tea, silk, porcelain, and then many other artifacts. But the problem is the Chinese in early half of the 19th century they barely need anything from British. Okay, the British try to sell the Chinese woolen coats, piano, right? European utensils, but the Chinese don't buy them. So the British always had this trade imbalance with East Asia. That means Europeans are buying too much from East Asia, they couldn't sell much to the East Asian people. So that means the money in forms of silver always flow to East Asian societies from the Western societies. This is a trade deficit or trade imbalance. So the British always had this problem until they find something that the Chinese like, and that is opium. That is opium. Okay, in early 19th century, a lot of people had no idea how. Yeah, sorry about this. In early 19th century, a lot of people didn't have any idea about how what kind of damage uh, opium can bring to people. They thought it was a medicine. They thought it was a medicine, and actually, the British were selling opium in China, and advertising them as some kind of a medicine that could cure almost all diseases. But actually, the kind of opium British sold to Chinese are highly uh, uh, purified opium with a very strong potent. Uh, so you get addicted to it very quickly. Okay, so it's not a medicine. It's a typical unethical drug. So the Chinese started to buy opium from the British, and that reversed the trade imbalance between China and Britain. And then in 1830s, when Chinese realized that even their soldiers, the military servicemen, are addicted to opium, they put a ban on opium and they confiscated the opiums traded by the British merchants. And then the British merchants say, hey, this is a violation of the rule of free trade. Okay, those opiums are properties of our British merchants. The Chinese government, you cannot just take them away and burn them down. Okay, that's what the Chinese government did. So the British in 1839, they launched a war against China. This is called the Opium War. And in when the first Opium War broke out, Britain was a semi-industrialized country. Had much better rifle, much better cannon guns, much better machines, much better boats. So their navy, the British Navy, bombed the Chinese cities and basically without resistance. And then they also attacked several cities. They totally defeated the Chinese army because at that time, the Chinese stopped using firearms. Although gunpowder was invented in China, but in the 1840s, in 1840, when the Opium War was going on, most of the Chinese soldiers stopped using firearms. So they were still using the primitive weapons like a spear, shields, and bows and arrows. So they were totally defeated by British army. So Japan saw all this. Okay, Japan saw the big brother in East Asia, China. China has been the big brother in East Asia, right? It's certainly the number one. It's Chinese consider themselves as the center of the universe, right? The emperor calls himself the son of heaven. So Japan has been looking up to China until the 1840s. Okay, when China was defeated by the Europeans. This created a sort of a intellectual crisis to Japanese, because in Japanese eyes, China has always been so great. It was never defeated, right? It was always Chinese empire that defeated other countries, right? But now China was defeated for almost the very first time by a foreigner, by a foreign country. So this really changed the sort of a confusion, a worldview of a lot of Japanese. Okay, and then also Japan continued to see after the military defeat, China had to open up its own market to the British. Okay, after the Opium War, a treaty was signed in Nanjing. This happened in 1842. The British said, "Hey, Chinese, you have to open up all these cities to us, okay, like Shanghai, like Guangzhou, right?" And the British said, you have to guarantee our merchants' rights, even if we sell opium, okay, in your country. You have to protect our merchants' rights. So of course, I mean, in today's view, it's kind of unreasonable, but at that time, it was considered as legitimate, justifiable by the British, and also signing treaty to guarantee, to protect a foreign country's rights in your country. This is a new thing. This is a very new thing for East Asian societies. It never happened, almost never happened before. Okay, so because for Chinese empire, for the empire in China, the son of heaven or the emperor always thought he's the ruler of all under heaven. Okay, the whole world. He would not treat another foreign country as equal. But signing a treaty with Britain means that you have to recognize all the other countries, all the other European countries like France, I guess Spain, United States, right, as equal. This is a new concept imposed on these East Asian societies. At first, it was difficult to accept. Okay, so that's the context. That's the context in which Americans went to Japan. Americans were latecomers. Okay, the British were already dominating Chinese market, but Americans wanted to trade with China because the Chinese market is just so large. Okay, Japan is a relatively small country. Okay, but When Americans realized how important it is to go to East Asia to trade, it was already kind of late. Uh, so, uh, so this American naval commodore Perry, Matthew Perry, he first went to Japan. Okay, he wanted to do the same thing that the British did in China. So the Americans want to do this to Japan because Japan's closer to America, right? If you look at the map, if you cross the Pacific Ocean before you go to China, you have to first land in Japan. So Americans thought, let's do Japan first, okay? And then eventually we'll go to China. We'll probably have to compete with the British, which is hard, but let's take over Japan. Let's force Japan to open up its own market to us. At least the British are not there yet, right? So that's easier. So 1853, Perry arrived at Japan with the four gunboats. The Japanese called those boats black ships, and this event is remembered in Japan as the arrival of the black ships. So as you can see, this is sorry, yeah, this slide. Uh, Look at this slide. This shows that okay, so um, there's illustration to this picture. It says it gave the dimensions, some specifications of the ship, how many cannon guns it has, how long this is, how tall the masts are, right? The sails are. So it gives some number and data. But this ship in general is described as almost a ship from hell, right? As you can see, there are beasts there. Certainly, this is not the case, right? I mean, Paris ships are not like that, right? Not like that. Um, so those ships are really are considered by Japanese as demon ships from hell. Yeah, this is another picture of the ship, and then the Japanese painter simply put all kinds of foreign national flags on that ship. Of course, this would not happen on Paris' ship, right? Because Paris' ship would not put other foreign national flags on itself. But in the eye of the Japanese, all these ships are the same. They are all terrible, terrible um, demon ships from hell. Okay. Okay. So Matthew Perry, what did he want? Perry wanted the Japanese to end the closed country policy. Okay, he wanted to get the same privileges that the British had over China. Okay, U.S. wanted Japan to open up its own market. Perry, when he first arrived in Japan, he had no idea who were really ruling Japan. He thought the Japanese emperor were the actual ruler in Japan. So he first sent his message to the emperor. He did not know that Bakufu was actually the ruler of Japanese military power and most people. So I mean, Americans were ignorant of Japan just like that. Um, so Perry wanted Japan to open up like China opened up to Britain. Okay, so eventually, but very quickly, Perry realized that you have to deal with the shogunate, the Bakufu. You have to negotiate with the Bakufu. So he sent his message to Bakufu. Okay, and the message is that if you don't Japanese, if you don't open up your market, if you don't let our merchants to trade with you, like British did to China, okay, that if you don't do that, there will be a war. Okay, and you and Japanese, you have seen how China is defeated. Okay, China suffered a humiliating military debacle at the First Opium War in 1840. Okay, so Americans are basically saying if you don't do that, if you don't satisfy our requests, we will fight you. Okay, we will have a war on you. Um, Perry also brought a sort of a small um, small engine locomotive. That means a train engine, and he set up a small mini tracks for that train. And the train engine is using steam power. That's the most advanced technology at the time. So Americans wanted to show Japanese how modern industry, how powerful modern industry is. So this is try to impress the Japanese and persuade them into agreeing uh, with the Americans. Instead, the Japanese showed the Americans sumo wrestling. Okay, they had several very strong sumo wrestlers, showing them muscle power. Okay, the Japanese are trying to say, hey, look at us, we're pretty strong too, right? But the Americans are trying to show industrial power, while the Japanese are still trying to impress foreigners with their traditional martial arts and muscle power. So this is a interesting contrast of the modern and the traditional. Okay. Okay, so eventually, Bakufu agreed to Americans' request. So a war is avoided. So the two treaties were signed with the United States. Okay, but these are called unequal treaties by Japanese. Why so? The reason is because basically Americans are pointing a gun against Japan's head and say, "Hey, sign this treaty, otherwise I'll kill you." So these treaties are called unequal treaties. Yeah, we have a Kanagawa Treaty in 1854. We have a Harris Treaty 1858. So these treaties guarantee that Japan is opening up its own market. Okay, so with the signing, when these treaties are signed, the Bakufu's Sekoku policy is officially ended. Closed country policy is totally ended. Okay, Japan also lost its own tariff control. What does this mean? This means that um, foreign powers are free to trade with the Japanese, and they don't have to pay import tax to the bakufu in the rate determined by the bakufu. Instead, foreign powers can pay any rate of import tax to the Japanese government as they want. So of course you want to pay only the lowest possible tax rate, right? So but Bakufu had no say on this. Bakufu cannot determine the import tax rate. Foreign powers do. I mean, in modern days, we know that this is totally unfair, right? Totally unfair because one country should have the sovereignty, should have the power to determine how much import tax they want to charge other countries. And this is a very important way for you to protect your domestic market, right? Because there are many, your own people are also running businesses. If their businesses are weak, in that case, you want to raise your tariff, your import tax rate, so that the cheap foreign products will not compete in your domestic market with your domestic producers, right? That's one way for you to protect your own people. The Japanese cannot do this because they lost the tariff control. So this is certainly a humiliation. Japan is bullied by Western powers, and more than that, they also foreign powers also had an extra territoriality. Okay, so I'm sorry, this is a long English word. Extraterritoriality. What this mean? What does this mean? This means the foreign powers could get a piece of land in Japanese cities and then rule it like the foreign powers rule their own territory. Okay, for example, part of the Japanese port cities, several Japanese port cities, they have to uh, they have to give a piece of land to foreign powers, and the foreign council would be the local official. Japanese officials cannot rule that place. Okay, and then the American law or British law would be practiced in that foreign concession in that piece of land. Okay, whoever live in that foreign concession, no matter you're Americans or Japanese, you're ruled by American law uh, and ruled by American council. Okay, so American council pretty much worked as like a mayor in that city. So again, this is a violation of the Japanese sovereignty. Right? Again, Japan is bullied. The U.S. Council Townsend Harris, he signed the treaty with Japan in 1858, and he pretty much worked as the local official of all Americans in Japan. So this is a lot of humiliations imposed on Japan. Um, Japanese realize that they're bullied. Okay, they realize that this is unfair. People just naturally have a natural instinct for justice. When they're treated unfairly, they will know that. They will know that. Okay, so this is Commodore Matthew Perry, and this is how Japanese painted a portrait of him. Yeah, portrait. This is the portrait of American. And that's a Perry. Okay, and in some other portraits, Perry is represented like this. It's a very hairy demon-like a figure. Okay, a demon-like a figure from hell. This is kind of how Japanese looked at Matthew Perry, a demon from hell, basically, a barbarian from hell. Okay, so last time we mentioned the Tokugawa Japanese society before Western, before the encounter with the West. They had a national market, but is isolated from the rest of East Asia. It had a unified religious system based on the worship to the emperor, based on Buddhism and Shintoism, right? Different daimyo had their own military system, right? Because local daimyo could tax local people. So with that financial income, they could build their own independent army. So that said, there is no national taxation system and central government. So there is no military mobilization system. You have to be born to be a samurai and to join the army, basically. The army does recruit footed soldiers from farmers, but they're not the mainstay. They're not the bulk of the army. The majority of the army are still samurai, and you have to be born to be a samurai. The society sees population growth, but they also see general poverty and a lot of social instability. So that's the Japanese society before Westerners come. Okay, Bakufu's first response to Paris ultimatum. Paris sent Bakufu an ultimatum. That is, if you don't agree to our terms, so we're gonna have a war. Okay, um, so Bakufu agreed to all Paris requests. But this made many daimyo unsatisfied. Okay, some daimyo say we should fight. We should fight. Okay, so there was some inner struggle, some power struggle at the within the Japanese bakufu between the bakufu and the emperor's court, right? Yeah, at that time, the shogun was sick and dying, so he did not want a war. Did not want a war, and the chief counselor went to Kyoto uh, to try to meet with the emperor and to get the imperial approval of the treaties they're going to sign with the Americans. Uh, but the emperor, the imperial court, disagreed. So there's this conflict between Bakufu and the imperial court. Okay, so since the Bakufu is so weak and so soft on the Americans, its authority is declining. It's declining. Okay, so in 1862, the alternate attendance system is canceled. Remember last time we talked about this. This is a system established in the early Tokugawa period. That means each daimyo must stay in Edo for 1 year and then live in his own home base for another year. So he had to constantly travel between Edo. Uh, Edo is today's Tokyo. Between Edo and his own home base. So since the Bakufu's authority is declining, a lot of daimyo say we don't want to do this anymore. Okay, this is very troublesome for us. Okay, we don't want to do this. So the system was canceled. And many daimyo is trying to develop their own military force to prepare further foreign invasion because they feel there's a very strong crisis going on. Among the daimyo that are not satisfied with the Bakufu's response to Americans, there are two major daimyos. Okay, two major daimyos. One is Satsuma. Okay, sorry, Satsuma. Okay, over here. Satsuma the daimyo Satsuma is located in the island of Kyushu. The other is Choshu. Okay, these two southern um, daimyos, they are far away daimyo. Okay, they are in fifth to lands far away from Edo, so they are in southern islands. Okay, but Satsuma is pretty strong. Okay, Satsuma is a very strong daimyo, thanks to the revenue they got from the trade with the Dutch. Okay, so for hundreds of years, Satsuma has been this a major trade town. Okay, this a portal town that they could trade with the foreigners. So they accumulated a lot of wealth, and the Dutch learning, the so-called Dutch learning, the Western learning is also popular in Satsuma. The samurai there, they have a broader horizon. They have a more open mind. They know how the West looks like. Okay, but the Bakufu in Edo, they are pretty narrow-minded. They never seen much foreign influences though. So once Americans came, they just scared off and agreed to everything that they asked. Okay. All right. So these two daimyo, Satsuma and Choshu, they were breaking a lot of laws. Actually, they secretly formed an alliance, a military alliance, against the Bakufu. The agreement is that at a certain point, they're gonna both rise up to launch a rebellion against Bakufu, and then they're gonna overturn Bakufu's rule, and then they would restore the emperor as the source of power. They're gonna welcome the emperor to to rule in Edo and totally eliminate Bakufu. They want to build a central empire, a centralized government. They want to build a Japanese empire with the emperor ruling, not the shogun. Okay, so Bakufu is faced with a lot of crisis. A lot of the daimyo are unhappy with them. Yeah, the young samurai called Shishi, they more and more samurai started to be loyal to the emperor because they see emperor as the hope to deal with the foreign aggressions. Okay, foreign aggressions really worked as a stimuli, as a stimulus to push Japan to change itself. Okay, a new slogan was put forward. That is, revere the emperor and repel the barbarians. This line is originally taken from Chinese Confucian texts. Okay, it's a traditional Chinese Confucian concept. You want to revere the emperor, you want to honor the old feudal system, and then you want to repel the barbarians. But now the Japanese samurais, they picked up this line to have a change, to have a reform. They want to overturn Bakufu, and they want to rally around the emperor so that they could kick out the barbarians that are the Westerners in this case. So with all the pressure from daimyos, uh, Emperor Kome, Emperor Kome made a request to the shogun to say, "Hey, remember uh, your original appointment? Because in Japanese, shogun's official appointment is the barbarian repelling generalissimo. So Emperor Kome now says, "Do your job, repel the barbarians." Okay, so that's the order the emperor gave to the shogun in 1861. But we know that the shogun really have independent military power. He could or could not, he may or may not take the order from the emperor, right? But so in this case, of course, Bakufu ignored uh, Emperor Komi's order. He basically didn't do anything to kick out the barbarians. But this is considered as, by many unhappy samurai, as another sign of a weakness. Okay, so Satsuma and Choshu, these two daimyo, they they're pretty strong. They have a lot of army. 25% of the national samurai are in these two daimyo. Okay, and they also mobilized non-samurai soldiers, especially Satsuma. Satsuma started to recruit peasants into their army to make their army even stronger. So they're secretly building a popular army, and they use Western firearms. So the Japanese are much ahead of the Chinese in terms of using Western military technology. Okay, um, so Choshu samurai, they liberated the emperor in 1864. They tried to they tried to launch a reform, saying, "Hey, we wanna follow the emperor, not the bakufu." Okay, so bakufu tried to punish Choshu in 1866. They sent an army, sent a expedition to attack Choshu, and bakufu also asked Satsuma to join the expedition. At the time, Shogun had no idea Satsuma and Choshu had a secret military alliance. So of course, Satsuma joined the rebellion very quickly. So if you look at the, so if you look at the, so this is a Honshu Island, right? This is Edo. The expedition, the army was sent by Bakufu from here, and they try to punish Choshu and Satsuma, Choshu and Satsuma here, right? Uh, in this battle, in the battlefield, um, the samurai from Satsuma, they uh, they launched a rebellion. They joined the Choshu, and they defeated Bakufu's army. Okay, Bakufu is totally defeated, and the remaining army had to return back to Edo. And on their way back to Edo, all the other daimyo saw how humiliated Bakufu was, and many other daimyo decided that we're not gonna loyal to Bakufu anymore. So if you look at this propaganda poster, it shows how Satsuma and Choshu samurai defeated Bakufu's samurai. Okay, what's interesting about this picture is that um, the the new kind of samurai are depicted as in Western style of military uniform. Do you see that? This is a European style of a military uniform. But Bakufu's samurai, they are described as still in traditional uh, clothing. So Satsuma and Choshu, the these two daimyo, they clearly know what they're doing. They know they represent a more modern civilization. They try to change Japan's tradition. Okay, so when Bakufu is defeated in the war, uh, the emperor moved to Edo from Kyoto. Okay, because Bakufu is totally ended. It's totally ended. The last shogun pretty much quit his position. Emperor's power is restored. This is why Meiji reforms are called Meiji Restoration because it restores the emperor's power. Okay, so when the emperor moved to Edo, they changed the name of that city to Tokyo, which means the eastern capital. Now it's called the capital because the emperor is there. Okay, so this is our Meiji emperor. Okay, Meiji emperor, for the first time as an emperor in perhaps more than 1,000 years, he is the first emperor that had actual power in Japanese history. Okay, so Japan for the first time became a real empire ruled by its own emperor. Okay, so this picture shows the moment when Emperor Meiji is having a court meeting and he's propagating the first Japanese constitution. Okay, so there's a lot of reforms conducted by the Meiji court, by the Meiji government. Okay, including having a constitution and having many other changes. So this whole series of reforms are called Meiji reforms. Okay, so basically all these reforms serve one purpose. That is to very quickly change Japan into a modern country, a modern nation. Okay, um, so yeah, 1867. The old emperor Komei died. Meiji emperor was enthroned, um, and then they launched a series of reforms. The idea is that first of all, we're gonna have a political reform. Okay, the political reform is to have a new style of imperial government. The Japanese follow the Prussian style parliament. Prussia is this one of the kingdoms in Germany. In the 1870s, Prussia eventually unified the country we call Germany, and build the first modern German empire, right? So that's Prussia. So Japanese like the Prussian style of government. So they had a Prussian style parliament and a constitutional monarchy. So they built a constitutional monarchy. The monarch, in this case, the Meiji emperor, is ruling based on a constitution. So this is the Western style of a political system. Sovereignty is restored to the emperor. Okay, um, the war is called a Boshin War, in which the Bakufu was defeated. Eventually, Edo was taken by the rebels, and the Bakufu is ended. Power is given back to the emperor. Edo renamed to Tokyo. We mentioned this. Okay, so Emperor Meiji issued the Charter Oath. Charter Oath basically is the foundation for the later Japanese constitution. The idea is to turn Japan into a modern political system. So we have basically we have 5 items on the Charter Oath. So who can help us read these clauses? We need a volunteer to read this for us. Anyone?
I'll do it.
Oh, please, thank you. Go ahead.
So the oaths were to establish deliberative assemblies to involve the public in decision making, to involve all levels of society in the affairs of the state, to abolish restrictions on the occupation and function for all people, to abandon the superstitions of the past and to embrace rational laws of nature, to seek knowledge from around the world to strengthen Japan.
Thank you. Thank you. So if you look at the clauses of the Charter Oath carefully, this is meant to turn Japan into a modern constitutional monarchy with a certain degree of democracy, right, and a constitutional rule, right. And they also try to change the whole society, right. They want to encourage more political participation, right. They want ordinary people to sort of recognize, join the government, and be proud of the government. And they're also gonna change the culture, right? They're gonna abandon the superstitions of the past. What are the superstitions of the past? What do you think the Charter Oath is referring to? Anyone?
Probably the class system of the samurai versus the farmers, and then the gender system where the certain occupations were favored towards certain genders.
Yeah, well, but we're talking about the superstitions of the past. What
Oh,
does that mean? Oh, you were talking about to abolish restrictions on the occupation, right? Yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah,
In that
that's what I
case,
was looking at.
yeah, you're right. You're right. Yes, many social occupations are now open to all genders and all social classes. So the privileges of the samurai are being taken away. You're absolutely right. Thank you. Yeah. But what about the superstitions of the past? What does that mean? What do they refer to? What are the superstitions?
Maybe some of the spiritual beliefs of like Shintoism.
Yeah, exactly. And also Buddhism, right? Buddhism also involves a lot of supernatural powers and superstitions, right? But now, from the perspective of modern science, all these are superstitions, and they're meant to be uh, eliminated. So they want to embrace the rational law of nature. This certainly means science. Okay, so Japan is going to open its mind and study the Western style of science to replace their old belief system. So this is a whole package of reform. It's a reform of almost all aspects of Japanese society, holistic reform. Okay, and they gotta seek knowledge from all around the world to strengthen Japan. But this doesn't include China, because China is demoted. They believe the knowledge system from China, like a Confucianism, Buddhism, probably would not solve Japan's problem. They're gonna look to the West. They're gonna look to the America. Uh, they're gonna look to European powers to seek knowledge. That's what they mean. So if we have to use one sentence to describe Meiji Restoration, that is get out of Asia and embrace the West or the Europe. Okay, so many things changed, right? So this is a traditional Japanese women, right? They're in traditional hairstyle, right? Traditional clothing, playing traditional musical instruments, doing traditional cultural activities. But now things are changed. Things have changed. The new Meiji period Japanese aristocratic women, upper class women, they have a Western hairstyle, Western clothing, doing Western style of sewing and other activities. Okay, they are totally changed. Okay, this is our Meiji Emperor. Meiji Emperor would like to be represented in Western military uniform. Did you see that? This is a Prussian, German or Prussian style of military uniform. Okay, this is not a traditional robe, but sometimes this is Emperor Showa. Sometimes the emperor would like to be uh, in the traditional clothing like this. It depends on the occasion. Okay, okay, more policies, more policies. With Japan very quickly modernized, the unequal treaties were abolished in the 1890s. So that's a great thing, okay, for Japan. And Japan is having a national currency system. The central government is issuing uh, Japanese yen or the Japanese legitimate currency, and everybody has to use that. This happens in Japanese history for the first time, okay, after Meiji Restoration, because in previously there was no national currency used in Japan. People can use all kinds of currency. You could have used Mexican-made silver coins. You could have used China-made copper coins, or some kind of other coins made by previous Japanese dynasties. All currencies are okay to use, but now you cannot use all these currency. You have to use the bills, the yen, printed by the Japanese central government. Okay, a national taxation system is also built up for the first time in Japanese history. Now every citizen must pay tax to the Japanese imperial government. Okay, previously you pay your tax to local daimyo or to the shogun if you live near him, right? There was all kinds of a taxation system, but now there is only one national taxation system. Okay, and in central government, there are two houses: the upper house and the lower house. The upper house is composed by uh, aristocrats appointed by the emperor. Okay, it's not elected. Okay, it's not elected, but the lower house are representatives elected by Japanese people. So there is a certain degree of democracy in the Japanese system. Okay, but keep in mind that not everyone can vote. Actually, the majority of the population couldn't vote. Okay, because there is a lot of restrictions on your right to vote. For example, all women couldn't vote. Okay, all Japanese women couldn't vote for representatives in the lower house until after World War II. And it's only because Americans want them to that the Japanese changed their constitution um, after World War II to allow women to vote. Okay, so during this time period, we're talking about during Imperial Japan. In Imperial Japan, women were discriminated against; they had no right to vote. Okay, and also men. For men that could vote, there's still a lot of restrictions. For example, education is one restriction. If you are illiterate, you cannot vote. The understanding is that if you are illiterate and didn't receive much education, how can you vote for our representatives? You cannot, okay, because you don't know much, you're ignorant. Also, there is a wealth bracket. You have to be wealthy enough to be able to vote. Okay, you have to pay tax to the government. If you're a homeless, you don't pay any tax to the government and don't have much wealth, no, you cannot vote. So there's a lot of restrictions on how many people can vote. So eventually, there's only less than 10% of Japanese actually the less than 10% of Japanese people could vote. So it's a limited, very limited democracy. All right. Um, and the new imperial government also very quickly engaged in military expansion in a Western style, because Japan first was bullied by Americans, but once modernized itself, it started to bully its own neighbors in East Asia. So the little kid that used to be bullied in the playground is becoming the big bully himself. Yeah. So Hokkaido was conquered in 1869, and then the kingdom of Okinawa, kingdom of Ryukyu, was conquered in 1879. Okay, and then they also tried to invade Korea in 1873, although the first attempt was thwarted by Chinese, but the Japanese came back again. In 1894, Japan again invaded, launched a war in Korea, and this time they defeated the Chinese. We're going to talk about this later. We call this the First Sino-Japanese War in 1894 to 1895, and the result is the victory of Japan, and Japan took Taiwan, the island, from China in 1895 as a result of the war. Yeah. So lots of things are changing. Lots of things are changing. But there are people who are not satisfied with this reform, right? For example, a samurai called Saigo Takamori. Saigo Takamori he's from Satsuma, and he during the Boshin War, when Satsuma and Choshu were fighting with the Bakufu, Saiga Takamori was fighting on the side of Satsuma, and he supported the emperor. He is a strong supporter of the Meiji reform. He wanted to eliminate Bakufu and then restore power to emperor, and he succeeded. But after the success, Saigo Takamori wanted more. Okay, he wanted to invade Korea immediately. He wanted to expand the Japanese empire. But most of his colleagues thought Japan was not ready. Okay, in the 1870s, when they just finished Meiji Restoration, Japan was not ready to invade Japan. They needed some time to prepare. It's not to say they don't want to invade Japan. It's just that they needed time. They needed time to prepare. But Saigo Takamori is a very radical and aggressive. He says, "Let me visit Korea, and in the Korean king's court, I'm going to insult the Korean king on purpose, so that they could kill me." Okay, and after they kill me, after the Koreans kill me, Japan would have a very good excuse to invade Korea. And he says, "Let's do that." Okay, but his colleagues at the court thought he was crazy. So he was kicked out from the court, from the imperial court. So he returned back to Satsuma, his hometown, and he's also not satisfied with other social policies like the equalization of all social classes. Right, most of his colleagues at the court, they thought they should eliminate the privileges of a samurai, but Saigo Takamori thought being a samurai is a great thing. Okay, so he believes that we should keep this samurai privileges. Okay, so when he returned back to his hometown in Satsuma, he started to recruit more samurai into his army, and he launched a rebellion. And he believes that for the second time, the emperor is surrounded by bad guys, and his job is to eliminate the bad guys now surrounding the emperor, like they did in the first Meiji Restoration. Right, the Meiji Restoration is considered by him as a job to eliminate Bakufu, which is the bad guy surrounding the emperor. But he thought he should do that again and again and again. Okay, he thought even after that, emperor is still surrounded by bad guys, so he should launch a rebellion to help the emperor. So they always thought they were helping the emperor. Okay, there was this is a screenshot taken from the movie The Last Samurai. It's a Hollywood movie. I mean, the movie in general is a terrible movie. It's a typical Orientalist view on Japanese society. But some fighting scene was pretty good. That story of the movie The Last Samurai, if you have watched it, if you haven't, you can probably check it out and watch it. The basic plot is about an American military advisor, okay, played by Tom Cruise. He went to Japan he hired by Japanese Meiji government to train their new popular army. Okay, the new popular army in Western style military uniform. But in the battle, Tom Cruise was captured by Saigo Takamori's samurai army. Okay, and then when Tom Cruise stayed with the Saigo Takamori, he sort of got converted to samurai culture, and he became a samurai, an American samurai. Okay, so eventually, when the central government is sending a huge popular army to crack down Saigo Takamori's rebellion, Tom Cruise joined the samurai side, and they used the traditional weapon to resist the popular army who are using machine guns and modern rifles. So the last samurais were all killed. So this a movie of Last Samurai is based on the real story of the rebellion led by Saigo Takamori. Okay, well, this picture actually shows the last battle when Saigo Takamori is leading his samurai army against the popular army sent from Tokyo, and they were all defeated. So next, I would like you to watch a short video from YouTube just to get a sense of the battle between samurai and the popular army. First, let me pause. Okay, so you just have watched the movie video from the movie The Last Samurai, and the movie is about the conflict between old samurai culture with the new modern civilization. But the movie is a lie. The movie is a lie because in the real battle that happened between Saigo Takamori and the popular army sent from Tokyo, both sides used Western style firearms. Both sides used that. Okay, so it's not Saigo Takamori was defending the older way of samurai fighting. That's not true. Actually, if you look at this picture, this is Saigo Takamori. He was in Prussian European style of military form. Okay, and his soldiers also used firearms because firearms are so effective. In the end, they were defeated. That's true. That's true about history. And he got a hit by a bullet in his hips, and he died a couple of hours later. So he did not have a glorified, honorable death. So the movie is a lie, is a lie. Okay. But Saigo Takamori does represent the last samurai. Okay, the end of the samurai era. Okay. According to the new constitution, everyone is equal in the new society. So Japan had to abolish samurai's privilege. Okay, the privilege, the social legal status of samurai has to be gone. Um, Previously the samurai had a privileged hairstyle. Yeah, only the samurai could have a certain the hairstyle. Ordinary people cannot have that. Okay, but now all these hairstyle changed, and you cannot carry swords on your streets anymore because a sword is considered as a dangerous weapon. All right, um, and then daimyo's status was also removed. The new Meiji imperial government had to remove daimyo as a feudal lords. Okay, all these feudal lords must either have to give their land to the emperor, that means to the nation, um, or they had to be bought out. Okay, so either way, some daimyo just give their land to the emperor, and they got some political appointments. They serve as ministers in the imperial government. Okay, the 280 domains called fan were turned into 72 prefectures, and the prefectures were ruled by prefects. That means local official appointed by the central government. So feudalism is totally gone. Japan said goodbye to feudalism. Okay. Um, and then the army is also reformed. It's not a samurai army anymore. The Japanese Imperial Army recruited commoners into the army, Every man over 20 had to serve 3 years in the army. So that's the military service you have to do. Okay, so it's a popular army. It's a popular army. Some samurai are not happy, like Saigo Takamori. So in 1873, there was this rebellion. It was a crackdown. It was a crackdown. Um, but in most parts of Japan, all these reforms were carried out peacefully and effectively. Stipends, money was given to previous daimyo to purchase their land and to purchase their title. So they gave up. Most of the daimyo just gave up their title and land, and then they just become an ordinary citizen. Everyone is the same. Samurai also lost their privileges. The government gave them bonds. This is actually a smart thing to do. The government gives samurai bonds. Say, hey, this is a compensation. Okay, you're not samurai anymore, but as a compensation, here's your bonds. If you hold the government bonds, it may appreciate in value over time. Eventually, some those samurais who took government bonds got rich. Those samurais who refused to take government bonds, they got nothing. But in general, samurai as a class is eliminated. No sword carrying, no special hairstyle or dress, no annual stipends anymore, no special status. Samurais became just ordinary Japanese citizens. Okay. But what's interesting is that precisely when samurai as a class is gone in history, the image of samurai became romanticized. Okay, so in modern time, when samurai as a social class is gone, people have all kinds of romantic feelings and images about samurai. They are considered as this I don't know, some kind of honorable, stoicistic, right? They stick to their own tradition and moral standards. They're against modernity. They're against industry. They're against the machines. They're against the commercializations. All these are bad things brought upon by modern era. But samurai, they're all different, right? They represent the spirit of Japan. They're the soul of Japan. Actually, well, there's one professor called Nitobi Inazo. In 1899, he published a book called Bushido, the Way of Warriors. Bushido means the way of warriors. Bushido, the soul of Japan. Okay, in which he praises samurai culture as the essence of Japanese culture. But this is a modern invention because we know that this is totally not true. This is totally not true in history, right? Because in traditional time, only less than 10% of Japanese population were samurai. Most of Japanese were not samurai, and they cannot be samurai. So how can you call samurai Bushido is the soul of Japan, right? So, but in modern time, in early at the turn of the century, right, and also in 20th century, a lot of Japanese just thought samurai is the spirit of Japan, is the core of Japanese culture. This is a modern invention. Keep in mind that this is totally different from historical facts. The real samurai, if you look at the picture on the right, on the slide, they are the typical samurai in the Tokugawa period, okay, or in Meiji Restoration period. They're just like ordinary people trying to find a job, roaming on the street trying to find a job, okay? They're not as cool as this image on your left, right? The cool image on your left is a typical samurai image you would find on a Japanese-made video game or a movie. Those movies and video games, they try to romanticize samurai, and this happens precisely when samurai is gone. Samurai as a class are all gone. So Sengoku policy is ended. Chinese Confucianism has declined. Japan tried to learn from the West. And in 1871, there is a Iwakura mission to the U.S. and Europe. The leading Japanese officials and intellectuals, they are traveling in the West, in the United States and Europe. They're trying to see what's going on in the world, and they try to learn from the West. And in the society, there's a boom of newspapers. Newspapers is a new thing, it's a Western style publication. Magazines, learning societies, books introducing Western sciences and the political knowledge. All these are popular in Japan. Okay, one of the leading intellectuals is called Fukuzawa. Mr. Fukuzawa uh, was a samurai, but he did not have much chance to fight. Okay, but he's a leading intellectual. He traveled in the United States and Europe, and then he returned back to Japan. He authored many books to introduce the new idea about civilization to his compatriots, to his fellow Japanese, fellow countrymen. He's trying to encourage a learning of the West. Okay, this picture is taken in the United States. Okay, the American girl standing on his left is not his girlfriend. That's the daughter of his American friends. But they took the picture like this. Fukuzawa was in traditional clothing still at that time. Okay, so long story short, Fukuzawa is trying to transform Japan into a modern civilization, to embrace Western style of education, politics, sciences, right? All these new things. Okay, so yeah, but on the other hand, there are still some people in Japan who believe they have to keep the Eastern spirit. Okay, Eastern spirit. Some Japanese believe they only need Western technology, and they cannot lose Japanese identity. They must keep the Eastern spirit, and this is also a very strong ideology. I mean, those we're talking about the other group of intellectuals, different from Fukuzawa. Believe that we should embrace West, but there are other people who have a different opinion. Okay, so new education system is established, uh, and the people new concept brought to people about the equal opportunities of people. People believe that everyone should have equal opportunity to education, to social resources, to benefits, to citizenship. Right, uh, Western style of universities were established, like a Keio University. Right, that's the first university established in Japan. Right, um, enlightenment is the dominant idea in Japan, Western style of enlightenment. But Japan also learned other things from the West, for example, imperialism. Since Japan was forced into the modern world by Westerners like Matthew Perry, they got this impression that although the West is powerful, they have sciences, new technology, but it's a strong eat the weak world. It's a dog eat dog world. You have to be strong. Japan has to be strong so that Japan can survive in this imperialistic world. Right, late 19th century. If you look at the world in late 19th century, it was a terrible world. Right, all these European powers they're establishing colonies all around the world. If you look at Africa in late 19th century, almost no country was independent. All African countries were colonies of European Western powers, except for perhaps one or two. So it was a terrible world. The Westerners were bullying other non-Western societies like China, like Southeast Asia, Latin America, Africa, uh, just as much as they want. So Japan saw all this, and the lesson Japan got from this Western imperialism is that Japan itself must be an imperialist power. So they have to Japan as the little boy that used to be bullied in the playground, has to become the big bully in the playground. So that's the lesson they learned. And they looked down upon China because China is not that successful in their transformation. China tried to change itself in Japanese style, but failed. In late 19th century, China failed. Okay, China did not have its own version of a Meiji Restoration, although they tried to. So as a result, China is falling behind. Chinese military power is weak. China is bullied, continued to be bullied by Western powers, and Japan saw all this. This is why in 1894, Japan launched invasion to Korea again. Again. Also there are many all kinds of isms popular in Japan, like enlightenment, democracy, right? All these are being spread in Japan. Nationalism. Okay, I want to talk about nationalism a little bit. Japanese nationalism is stimulated by the West. Okay, there was no nationalism before Meiji Restoration. But after Meiji Restoration, there is a new idea coming up in Japan. That is, Japan is a nation state. Okay, and Japanese nation is a homogeneous. But this is a myth. Okay, even within the Japanese nation, there are a lot of ethnic diversities. There are Ainu people. There are people from Okinawa. There's some in the south. There are darker skinned Japanese people. They're considered as bakumin, the discriminated people. So there, even within Japanese nation, there are still a lot of ethnic diversities. But nationalism try to eliminate the diversities. Their nationalism trying to tell all Japanese, we're all the same. We're all the same. Okay, we're all the same. We must be loyal to our emperor. We and together we're strong. And the Japanese education system repeats this myth again and again and again and again to its own people until everybody believes it. So nationalism is being constructed. Okay. Social Darwinism. Social Darwinism believes that human societies are just like a jungle. It follows jungle rule, and it's always the strong eat the weak. Okay, you'll have to be a strong empire so that you can bully your neighbors and not to be bullied by your neighbors. So it's like you have to follow the jungle rule. There is no truly justice in the international community. Okay, it's always power that determines the results. Imperialism, you must follow. You must turn Japan into a very strong empire to defeat the West, because the West is always trying to bully Japan from the beginning. So as a modernized new Japan, we must defeat the West. So that's imperialism. So all these isms are competing with each other and also all rising in Japan, making the society complex. Um, okay, Marxism and socialism. This is also some kind of a new ideology imported from Europe. In the after 1920s, socialism and communism was also imported to Japan from Soviet Union. So there are many the left wing intellectuals are promulgating the idea of Marxism in Japan as well. And Marxism focuses on class struggle. They're trying to tell people that hey, there's always a class struggle throughout human history. The rich is always trying to bully the poor. So the poor, so-called proletarian class, must unite together, turn against the rich people to build a communist government. So there are communists in Japan. Actually, communism is pretty popular in Japan to a certain degree. All right. Okay, look at the political system. The political system, uh, political parties are encouraged in the lower house. Okay, 1881, the Liberal Party was organized. 1882, the Progressive Party was established, and those parties are pretty active in the lower house. They try to pass bills by petitions, by submitting petitions, by forming, organizing rallies, and having memberships for more people to join their party. Right? There is a popular rights movement in the 1880s. Women were also encouraged to participate in politics. 1889, based on the Charter Oath, Meiji Constitution was issued. Okay, the Constitution prescribes that there is an elected lower house and appointed upper house, and people's rights and duties are guaranteed in the Constitution. Okay, but the old samurai, they still formed a center of power, a small circle of friends called the Genru politicians. They surrounded the emperor, and they heavily influenced the emperor in making policies. In making policies, And these old aristocratic politicians, they don't like the idea of popular rights. They don't want to give people too much rights. Okay, so the military. The military is an interesting body because according to the Meiji Constitution, the Japanese military system reports to the emperor directly. Okay, it could bypass the civil government. So that's the interesting thing. Okay, so the military only sees the emperor as their commander, not the leader in the parliament or the civil government. So it's by and large independent. Okay, this is a problem actually. This is a problem. But the military needs the lower house to pass bills to increase budget every year. Okay, so that's the problem. So there are some checks and balances within this system. So the military always wanted more money from the lower house. But a lot of times the lower house say, no, we cannot give you too much money. We want to allocate funds for education and civil construction. But then the military says, if you don't give us money, you know what? So we're gonna assassinate you. Okay. Actually, the military always, quite often in the 20s and 30s, we're talking about the 1920s and 30s, they assassinated many civil ministers if they don't like them. So the military is quite independent. And in 1931, the military even attacked a Chinese province in Manchuria without any approval from Tokyo. Uh, imagine a U.S. military commander in Afghanistan attacked Pakistan without approval from Vatican. So that's a similar event. That would be considered as totally inconceivable by Americans, right? But in 1931, this is what happened in Japan. Okay, the lower ranking military officers, they just don't take order from Tokyo, and they could launch military operation just on their own. It's a terrible situation, and this is part of the reason why World War II eventually broke out in Japan. Okay, the emperor. The emperor is considered as the living god, right? He is now not only the leader of the civil government, the leader of the parliament, is also the leader of all Japanese military force. Okay, so look at this propaganda poster. The Japanese, when they are the Japanese Imperial Army, when they are doing a military exercise, they always consider their emperor is watching them. Okay, the emperor is like a living god standing there, pointing in the right direction for them. So they're fighting for their emperor. In World War II, uh, the emperor's the cult of the emperor's personality explains why many Japanese soldiers fight so hard, and they're willing to sacrifice themselves for their emperor, for the emperor. And expansionist war, expansionist warfare. Um, Japan first conquered Hokkaido in 1869, and then it conquered Okinawa, uh, and then in 1894 they invaded Korea. Okay, and this time they defeated Chinese and the Korean um, allied force. So if you look at the map, Korea is here. Korea always served as a bridge for Japan to enter the continent. Japan's ultimate ambition is to occupy, or at least part of the continent, so that Japan could have all the resources, manpower from the continent, because Japan is always lacking natural resources. 1894, Japan invaded Korea, and there they had a war with the Chinese. The Japanese defeated, if you look at some posters at the time, this is an interesting poster, an ancient cartoon drawn by Westerners. Both Chinese and the Japanese are stepping on the poor Koreans, okay? And the Russians are watching across the river, Okay, while the Russians also want to take advantage of Korea, but they're watching the war in 1894 between China and Japan. In the war, Japan sunk almost all Chinese battleships at the Sea of Japan. So it's an incredible success, incredible success. The Chinese, this is the Chinese Navy, Chinese Beiyang Navy or North Sea Fleet. Uh, the Chinese North Sea Fleet uh, hired Europeans to train their soldiers, just like the Japanese do. The Japanese did the same thing, um, but the Japanese battleships worked better. They sunk almost all Chinese battleships, and this propaganda poster shows the battle in Pyongyang. In Pyongyang, remember when Hideyoshi in the 1590s, when Hideyoshi invaded Korea, the Japanese were stopped by Chinese at Pyongyang, right? But this time, in 1894, the Japanese took Pyongyang and they defeated the Chinese troops in Pyongyang. Actually, during the battle, the Japanese soldiers only brought 3 days of supply of food and ammo. So if the Chinese have held on the Pyongyang city for like 1 day longer, the Japanese would have to withdraw. But the Chinese just dropped their weapon and retreat and ran away. Actually, the Chinese had a better weapon than the Japanese. Okay, more Western observation of the war, right? So the Westerners are watching behind a wall. They're watching how the small samurai, that is Japan, to challenge the big giant, that is China. And to everybody's surprise, little samurai beat the big giant. They beat the big giant. Okay, so after the war, after the first Sino-Japanese War in 1894, Japan wanted entire Manchuria, but Russia, Britain, and France did not want Japan to dominate Northeast Asia. So the three countries they allied together to help China to force Japan to give up Manchuria. Actually, during the later part of the war, the Japanese already controlled almost the entire Manchuria because they defeated the Chinese. Right, Manchuria is this part of China. It's a huge land shrouded by forest. It's Manchuria is 6 times larger than Japan itself. Have very fertile land, a lot of natural resources, full of timber and other mines. Japan wanted Manchuria very very much, but in 1895, the European powers forced Japan to give up. But Japan did get Korea. Okay, after the war, Japan also got Taiwan, this island, from China. Okay, from China. This happened in 1895. And then since 1895, Japan had a colonial rule in Taiwan. They're trying to turn the Taiwanese or Chinese language speaking populations in Taiwan. Japanese tell them that you're Japanese, okay, and you must be loyal to our emperor. So after 50 years of colonial rule, most Taiwanese thought they were Japanese. So when World War II broke out in 1937 in East Asia, many Taiwanese people they joined the Japanese Imperial Army. Okay, they were fighting on the Japanese side, and since they can speak both Japanese and Chinese, these Taiwanese in Japanese Army normally worked as interpreters or translators. Okay, in 1945, when World War II ended, Japan was defeated, and according to the agreements between Stalin, Roosevelt, and the Chinese leader Chiang Kai-shek, Taiwan was given back to China. So this is a complicated political situation. So in 1945, when World War II ended, Taiwan was in Japanese colonial rule for 50 years. And right before the war ended, right before Japan surrendered, the Taiwanese they thought they were Japanese. They thought they were losing the war, right? They thought they were losing the war. A lot of people are sad. They're crying. They thought they're losing the war. But right after Japan surrendered, when the Chinese came from mainland, when the Chinese arrived Taiwan. They said, no, you didn't lose the war. We won the war. We won the war because we were all Chinese. So identity is an interesting issue in the 20th century. So for Taiwanese, are they Japanese? Are they Taiwanese? Are they Chinese? Very difficult to identify. Are they losing the war in World War II or are they winning the war in World War II? Who knows? It all depends on which side you want to take. Okay, but Japan did have a very brutal colonial rule in Taiwan, because in 1895. I'm sorry for this graphic picture, but this is exactly what the Japanese Imperial Army did in Taiwan. They cut off the heads of everyone who say no to them. So the local resistance was brutally cracked down by the Japanese Imperial Army. Okay, another war. 1904, Japan again engaged in a war with Russia. This time, the purpose of war is to occupy China's Manchuria. Okay, in 1904, Russia and Japan were fighting in China's Manchuria. Both powers try to occupy this area. The war is really brutal. Okay, the war is really brutal because this is the first time when machine guns were used in a war, and it turned out to be devastating. It was devastating. For example, there was a battle called the Port of Arthur over here. If you zoom in here there is a city called Dalian or Port of Arthur. Russians set up a garrison in there, and the Japanese tried to take over that city. But the Russians used machine guns to defend the garrison. But the Japanese had no idea how powerful machine guns were. So on one day, they launched many charges at the garrison. Japanese soldiers, they follow order just unconditionally. Okay, if their officers ask them to charge, everyone charges. Okay, no one retreats. As a result, the Japanese lost tens of thousands of soldiers just in one day because of machine guns. Okay, but finally, after such a huge casualties, the Japanese still took the port of Arthur city with the huge casualties. Okay, so this is another propaganda poster made by the Japanese. It shows how the Japanese military man is slashing on the Russian soldier, and even when he's killing the Russian soldier, he's still holding a foldable fan. He never lost the grace of a samurai. Okay, and the fan has the Japanese national flag on it. Okay, so yeah. See, at first, before the war, all the Western powers thought the Russians would punish Japanese as easily like that. Okay, see this. If you look at this poster, this Russian soldier is punching at the face of an ugly Japanese soldier. But the result is Japan totally defeated Russia. One episode of the war is that Russia wanted to mobilize its own fleet to the Far East to join the war. But the only fleet the Russians had are in the Baltic Sea over here. Do you see that? The Baltic Sea. This is the Baltic Sea, right? So the Russians moved their Baltic Sea fleet all the way to Japan. They basically crossed almost the half of the globe to finally arrive at the Tsushima Strait. It took the Russian Baltic fleet 1 whole year to finally travel through all this long journey to arrive Japan to join the war. But it took the Japanese only 1 day to destroy the entire Russian Baltic fleet. So Japan had a huge, incredible victory in the war. And this is also the first time in history that a non-Western nation, that is Japan, defeated a Western power, that is Russia. The first time in human history. So Japanese are very, very proud of themselves. Okay, very, very proud of themselves. Okay, to sum up, a lot of achievements made by the Meiji reform, including national taxation system, effective central government, a new popular imperial army, a railway system, unified Japan with the national identity, new education system. The state, the imperial government also carried out. They built a national school system. Okay, they encourage all students to come to school to study, and it's all sponsored by the state with a discounted tuition. Modern industry is also built up. Compulsory national education. That's what we have been talking about. Um, After Japan won the first Sino-Japanese War, China had to pay Japan a huge war indemnity. That means a compensation. Okay, the defeated country must pay the winning country a huge money. So this is commonplace for the world before World War II. Okay, so China paid Japan huge money. The money is equivalent for Japan's national revenue for many years, and with that money, Japan built a compulsory national education system. This allows Japanese government to stipend their own children for education. Okay, so the national literacy rate is rising very quickly after the war, and 98% of children were receiving primary education, and this is a law. Okay, you have to receive education. You cannot say no to this compulsory education system. So this allows Japan to further develop itself to become one of the most powerful nation in the world. So so that's the historical significance of the Meiji Restoration. So this will end up our lecture today.